Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is April the 19th, 2024. It has been 3,735 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 59 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 56 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Thursday through Friday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment, and there aren't a lot of changes from yesterday. If you want to skip ahead, I understand. And it won't hurt my feelings, because I won't even know. 1. Ukrainian forces have insufficient ammunition resources to hold existing defensive lines and protect the civilian population, and without immediate assistance will be forced to withdraw on multiple axes. 2. We maintain it is highly likely that the United States government will restart military aid to Ukraine by April the 30th. 3. Based on multiple reports that the United States has set multiple restrictions on what military equipment can be provided and how it can be used due to a misguided fear of a Russian tactical nuclear strike, the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 4. Russian forces have an operational goal to capture Chasiv Yar by May the 9th, regardless of cost. 5. Russia is also setting conditions in 2 additional operational areas for future wider attacks, but we continue to question how much combat potential will be available to expand current operations this summer. 6. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. In our assessment, the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs will continue to encourage escalation. 7. The disjointed response to Russian aggression by Ukraine's allies continues to embolden Moscow, leading to the most serious airspace violation of a NATO country since Russia expanded its war of aggression on February the 24th, 2022. Inaction by the United States and the excessively risk-averse rules of engagement forced on the NATO alliance are creating an environment ripe for a serious international incident. 8. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and the situation is more serious, especially the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, than what the International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting. After Wednesday's successful strike on the Jankoy military airfield in occupied Crimea, Russia did what it always does after a military target is destroyed: attack Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. On the night of April the 18th and the 19th, Russia launched 14 Shahed-136 one-way drones and 22 missiles from Tu-95 MS and Tu-22 M3 strategic bombers and tactical aviation. Ukrainian air defenses were able to intercept all 14 Shaheds, both Kh-101 subsonic cruise missiles, 11 of 12 Kh-59 guided air-to-surface missiles, and 2 of 6 Kh-22 supersonic air-to-surface anti-ship cruise missiles. Russia also launched 2 Iskander-K ballistic cruise missiles from occupied Crimea. After the airstrikes, a Tu-22 M3 suffered an unexpected disassembly in flight and crashed near Bogomolov in the Stavropol region of Russia. We link to the video of a bomber in flames as it spirals out of control into the ground. There's more information in the podcast description on how to become a subscriber to our almost daily situation reports, as well as a link. The Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, claims the aircraft experienced a mechanical issue, while Ukraine claims it shot the bomber down. Moscow said all 4 crew members ejected and the plane crashed in a remote area. Russian officials in Stavropol reported 2 were recovered and are now in hospital. The whereabouts and condition of the other crew members are unknown. During the air raid, Poland scrambled F-16s to the Ukrainian border as Shahed-136 one-way drones approached the Odessa area. There were no reports of NATO alliance airspace violations, and the United States did not provide refueling aircraft support. The Russian strikes targeted Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Mykola Lukashuk, the oblast's administrative and military governor, wrote on Telegram, quote, "The tragic events of this morning are an act of terror. The Russian army's missile attack on 3 peaceful cities of the Dnipropetrovsk region is terror, first of all, aimed at peaceful people. Russia took advantage of the inadequacy of modern air defense systems in Ukraine and the apparent interruption in the supply of weapons from Western partners." The city of Dnipro was attacked 3 times from Thursday to Friday morning. On Thursday, a Russian missile hit civilian infrastructure and a factory, causing 2 fires. 2 people were injured, with both in hospital. Russian propagandist fighter bomber claimed that one-way drones struck up to 3 MiG-29s on the ramp at Dnipro airport. Based on lighting and weather conditions, it is highly unlikely the strike was on April the 17th or the 18th, and at least one of the aircraft claimed to be destroyed was hit by a drone last year. We cannot verify the Russian claim, and we cannot determine if the other 2 aircraft were operational, decoys, or already disabled. This morning, Kh-22 anti-ship missiles struck the railroad station and a 5-story apartment building in Dnipro. The top 2 floors of the apartment building were completely destroyed. At the time of publication, Governor Lysak said that 2 people were killed and 16 wounded, with the number expected to climb, possibly significantly. The Dnipro-Holovny railroad station and its infrastructure were severely damaged, causing rail service to be suspended. Another missile struck the Sinelnikovo rayon, where search and rescue operations are ongoing. 6 civilians were killed, including 2 children, 6 and 8 years old, and 2 more were wounded. City infrastructure was hit in Kryvyi Rih, causing a fire. 3 people were injured, 2 men and a woman, with 2 in hospital. Governor Lysak also reported that a factory was hit in Pavlograd. In Kharkiv Oblast, the settlement of Sorokivka was hit by an S-300 anti-aircraft missile used for a ground attack, damaging a store and wounding 1 civilian. Vovchansk was hit by 3 Fab-500 UMPK Glad bombs, destroying a cafe, a church and a 2-story apartment building, wounding 1 person. Under international humanitarian law, churches have protected status, and destroying one is considered a war crime. In Donetsk Oblast, Russian shelling struck an apartment building in Ocheretine, killing a civilian. During the search and rescue operation, 2 more bodies were found from an April the 15th attack. Selidove was hit by 4 rockets, damaging an administrative building, a grain hangar, a store and private homes. 1 person was killed. Pokrovsk was also attacked, with a service station, a business and private cars destroyed. In the Novgorod-Siversky rayon of Chernihiv Oblast, Russian forces targeted a humanitarian aid worker who was delivering bread to the border region of Russia. The shop he stopped at was damaged, and the 30-year-old driver suffered a concussion from the blast. Russian shelling of Free Kherson Oblast targeted 14 villages and settlements, as well as the city of Bereslav and Kherson. 5 apartment buildings, a medical clinic, a city administrative building, and gas and steam pipelines were damaged. The attacks wounded 3 people. Moving to the action report, we start in Luhansk Oblast in the Kremina area of Operation Oreo, where Russian forces attempted to advance on Terny and Yampolivka without success. In the Severskoye of Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance on Bilogorivka from the northeast and southeast of Verkhnyokamyansk from Zolotarivka. Moving to the Donbass, in northeastern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces ended most of their probing attacks in the Severskoye of Donetsk Oblast. Fighting continued southeast of Vyimka, with no change in the situation. In the Kostantinivka AO, intense fighting continued. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSCFU, reported that Russian attacks on Kalinivka were repulsed. Fighting continued on the edges of the Novy micro-district in Chasiv Yar, with Russian mercenary Milbloga Vogonzo reporting that Russian troops were pushed back. The spokesperson for Operational Command East, Lieutenant Colonel Nazar Voloshin, also reported that Russian troops were pushed back, saying, quote, "Chasiv Yar in Donetsk region is now under full control of the armed forces, but terrorists are trying to destroy the city." A Russian video showed the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, freely operating, with Su-25 ground attack aircraft loitering over Chasiv Yar, repeatedly striking Ukrainian positions. Speaking on Marathon, Voloshin said Russia had concentrated 20,000 to 25,000 troops from Kalinivka to Klishivka for the ongoing assault, and the composition included regular military, Mobiks, and foreign mercenaries. Ukrainian Milblogger Bogdan Miroshnikov reported that Russian troops were, quote, making even more efforts to break through as far as possible in the city and reach the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Southeast of Chasiv Yar, fighting continued in Ivanivske, with no change in the situation. Moving to assessment. We are unsure if 25,000 troops is a sufficient force to complete the capture of Chasiv Yar. If Ukrainian forces weren't hobbled by critical shortages of short-range air defense, mortars, artillery rounds, and anti-tank weapons, 2 brigades could hold the defense lines along the axis. Russian forces aren't advancing due to superior tactics, strategy, or equipment. They're advancing because Ukrainian forces can't shoot back. Further south, fighting northwest, north, and east of Klishivka increased in intensity. We had previously assessed that as long as Ukrainian forces hold the ridges east of the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, east of Stupochki, Russian forces will have a very difficult time advancing on the southern flank of Chasiv Yar. In southwest Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces are attempting to flank the natural defensive barriers west of Avdiivka from the north. In the Avdiivka AO, we had previously assessed that Russian forces would suffer significant losses advancing across the open beet fields west of Avdiivka. 2 months after the capture of the city, that assessment has aged well. The earlier decision by Ukrainian commanders not to improve static defenses west of the city and its flanks was an error, and Russia is attempting to exploit it. In Novokolonova, Russian troops advanced deeper from the east, and heavy fighting continued. Following the railroad grade, Russian troops temporarily occupied the electrical substation on the southeastern edge of Ocheretine. After establishing control, a company of light infantry moved up, preparing to make a larger assault into the village. They became encircled, with approximately 50 soldiers successfully breaking out. The rest of the Russian force was eliminated by artillery. Armored also reported fighting in the area of Novobakhmutivka. Quick assessment. Here's the problem. If Russian forces can capture Ocheretine, they can continue to advance on the T-511 highway toward Grodivka and set conditions for a later offensive toward Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. This route bypasses the fields, ridges, ponds, reservoirs, and streams west of Avdiivka, where hundreds of Russian troops are dying every day. Yesterday, Ukrainian forces pushed deeper into Berdichi than we had previously assessed, with the ruins of the village now a no-man's land. Russian mercenary Milbloga Vogonzo reported fighting continued in Semenivka, and Russian sources reported that heavy fighting continued east of Umanske and near Netailova. It would be inaccurate to call the situation in this area stable, but Russian forces continue to suffer significant losses. Further south, Russian and Ukrainian sources reported that fighting continued in Pervomaiske. In the Vuhledar AO, heavy fighting continued on the edges of Krasnogorivka, with the VKS relentlessly bombing the settlement. It was a similar situation in Novomykhailivka, where Ukrainian forces have stabilized their defensive lines. Russian forces made another attempt to advance from Solodka in the direction of Vodyane, further south from the failed armor assault of April the 15th. 6 more armored vehicles were lost, with Russian troops retreating. Finally, Russian forces continued their assaults in the Staromlynivka AO, restarting attacks south of Urozhaine and continuing their attacks west of Staromayorske. There was no change in the situation. In Zaporizhzhia and Kherson oblasts, fighting intensity remained low. Russian assaults continued in the Orikhiv AO, with Russian sources claiming fighting continued northwest of Verbove, while Ukrainian sources reported fighting in the no-man's land south of Robotyne. The International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) reported that Russian occupiers claimed there was another one-way drone attack on the training center adjacent to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Director General Rafael Grossi reported there was no damage or casualties, and Russian occupiers refused to allow IAEA monitors to inspect the site, being told that it was a, quote, potential security risk. Grossi said, quote, "If confirmed, it would be an extremely worrying development. Whoever is behind these incidents, they appear to be ignoring the international community's repeated calls for maximum military restraint to avert the very real threat of a serious nuclear accident. As I told the United Nations Security Council a few days ago, these reckless attacks must cease immediately." Unquote. The IAEA reported there was a successful rotation of its inspectors on April the 16th, with Grossi saying that the nuclear watchdog's presence was needed more than ever. IAEA inspectors reported the sound of outgoing artillery fire near the power plant and for the first time provided some insight into how close the artillery units are to the plant, with car alarms being set off in the administrative building parking lot. "We have repeatedly assessed that Russian forces are shelling the Nikopol rayon in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, using the area around the plant as a shield to counter battery fire." The new group of inspectors were able to walk the NPP's perimeter, but were blocked from accessing parts of the turbine halls, the cooling pond where an earlier Ukrainian drone video clearly showed Russian forces had dug bunkers, and the 330 kV switchyard at the Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant. In the Kherson AO, Russian forces continued their attempts to push Ukrainian forces out of Krynke without success. Now let's talk about what happened on the Russian front. In Belgorod, air defenses were once again active, with the Kremlin claiming 40 Grad Vampire rockets and 3 drones were shot down. There were numerous reports of damage across the city from falling debris. The Kamensky chemical plant in Kamensk-Shakhtinsky in the Rostov region was attacked by Ukrainian drones, sparking a significant fire. Russian officials initially claimed 3 drones were shot down without incident. As smoke rose over the factory, Moscow claimed it was from a fire drill that included the use of smoke grenades for realism. The fire drill happened to start immediately after 3 drones exploded. Thursday's drone strike on Voronezh did not strike a warehouse with lumber and machine tools, as claimed by Russian officials. 3 geolocated videos provide enough information for triangulation, showing that the 866th fuel depot of the Russian Federation Armed Forces was hit.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. I have an errors and omissions today. Yesterday, we reported that the $7.85 billion in new presidential drawdown authority for Ukraine, as proposed by US Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, would be on the basis of a loan. That was inaccurate. Part of the non-military aid within the package includes $7.8 billion in direct financial assistance. It is those funds that would be provided as a loan. We thank you for your understanding. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said that in April 10 Bogdana 155mm self-propelled howitzers will be delivered, up from 6 per month at the start of the year. Currently, Ukraine is independently building enough SPGs a year to replace field losses. The Russian-owned news site Forbes reported that Ukraine had built its version of the Chinese DJI Mavic 3 drone. The Ukrainian version is more resistant to electronic warfare, has an 80-kilometer range, and can carry a 2-kilogram payload. It is reported that Ukraine can build 5,000 a month. The spokesperson for Operational Command South, Captain Natalia Humanyuk, has been dismissed by the General Staff. The termination happened a day after more than 150 journalists, photographers, and news organizations released an open letter demanding she be replaced. The journalist said that Humanyuk had forbidden, quote, coverage of Russian war crimes and does not allow the defenders of Kherson Oblast to be shown. Complaints about press access started in June 2023 after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. A replacement has not been named. 2 Russian agents were detained in Germany, accused of spying on United States military facilities and preparing to commit acts of sabotage, including on supply lines to Ukraine. The first suspect is a 39-year-old man named Dieter S., who was already under surveillance by German security officials. He is accused of agreeing to the acts of sabotage in October 2023 and was prepared to use bombs and commit arson at military infrastructure sites and facilities in Germany, including US military bases. Dieter is a Russian-born and was a little green man with the 1st Army Corps of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic from 2014 to 2016. Because Germany declared the militia a terrorist organization, he is also facing charges of being a member of a terrorist organization abroad. And when he was arrested, he had an illegal firearm and could face an additional charge of preparing a violent act that threatened the state. His co-conspirator is a 37-year-old Alexander Y., also a Russian living in Germany, who was recruited into the sabotage plot in March. He is accused of acting as an agent of the Russian Special Services. Chancellor of Germany Olaf Scholz said, quote, "We cannot and will not put up with this." The German Foreign Office Twitter or X account wrote, quote, "The suspicion that Putin is recruiting agents in our country to carry out attacks on German soil is extremely grave. We will not allow Putin to bring his terror to Germany." This was communicated to the Russian ambassador today during a summons. The plot was exposed 3 days after there was a fire at the Scranton Army ammunition plant in Pennsylvania. The US Department of Defense has not released any information on what caused the fire or whether plant operations were impacted. Scranton is one of only 2 factories in the US that produces 155mm artillery shells. On April the 17th, there was also an explosion at the BAE Systems ammunition factory in Monmouthshire, South Wales, United Kingdom. In that incident, David Davis, an MP for Monmouth, told the BBC that the blast happened, quote, in a remote part of the site that had been set aside to take apart shells. Ukrainian and Polish law enforcement arrested a Polish citizen who was working with the main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, or the GRU, on a plot to assassinate President Zelensky. The man, only identified as Pavel K., allegedly volunteered and was providing intelligence on the security measures at Rzeszów-Jasionka airport. The GRU would use the information to target Zelensky during a future visit. President Zelensky warned that because Russia has destroyed almost all of the thermal power plants in Ukraine, attacks on nuclear power plants can't be ruled out. We had previously assessed that continued strikes on Ukraine's electrical infrastructure could lead to a system collapse, forcing some or all of Ukraine's nuclear power plants to rely on diesel generators to circulate coolant and run safety systems. While the statement may seem hyperbolic, we agree with President Zelensky that there is a small but increasing risk of a nuclear accident. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, called on EU nations to transfer their air defense systems to Ukraine. Quote, "We have Patriot systems, we have anti-missile systems. We must take them out of our barracks where they stand just in case and send them to Ukraine, where the war is raging." Helmut Rauch, the head of the German arms manufacturer DL Defense, said that Ukraine would receive another IRIS-T air defense system in a few weeks, with more to be delivered through 2024. Currently, Ukraine has 3 IRIS-T systems in operation. NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said that the alliance was in talks with, quote, "some specific countries to redeploy parts of their systems to Ukraine." He added that the supply of the Patriot air defense system was critically important due to its capabilities. One of the challenges facing NATO alliance members is the Charter requires maintaining a minimum number of air defense systems. Because some European nations over-leveraged the Cold War peace dividend, many only have the minimum number in inventory. Chancellor Scholz said that he was hoping to find 6 more Patriots within NATO and was using every opportunity to express the urgency of the situation. The Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, announced they were accelerating the transfer of F-16 multi-role fighter planes to Ukraine from 2025 to this summer. The airplanes could be transferred as soon as the next 40 days. In the United States, CIA Director William Burns told Capitol Hill that if lawmakers, quote, "don't approve aid to Ukraine now, Kyiv could lose the war by the end of the year." With the boost that would come from military assistance, both practically and psychologically, Ukrainians are entirely capable of holding their own through 2024 and puncturing Putin's arrogant view that time is on his side. There is a very real risk that the Ukrainians could lose on the battlefield by the end of 2024, or at least put Putin in a position where he could essentially dictate the terms of a political settlement. Unquote. Congressman Michael McCaul was speaking out in support of the new bill introduced by House Speaker Mike Johnson. Here is what he said during a press conference on U.S. news channel CSPAN.
Any expert you talk to, every military General Jack Keane to Mike Pompeo will tell you there's a national security interest here because if Ukraine falls, then Moldova is going to fall, then Georgia, then the Baltics are at stake. And you're looking at parallels to 1939 all over again. And then eventually they're going to hit a chord with the NATO Article 5, and we're going to have to send our men and women over there. And the reason I want this, they're fighting for us is what they tell me. And I want to give them everything they need to at least push the Russians back so we don't have to send our men and women over there. It's called deterrence. If we fail on that and surrender in Ukraine like we did in Afghanistan, does that make the United States, does that make it more powerful or weaker? It makes us weaker.
McCaul joined a number of Democrat and Republican leaders in a press blitz supporting the passage of Speaker Johnson's supplemental spending bills. However, not everyone is on board. At the time of publication, there had been 137 amendments added to the Ukrainian aid package. Not all the amendments are meant to derail the package. Still, an analysis found that 33 are meant to delay passage of the bill. 17 are so-called poison bills, attaching requirements that would make the bill impossible. And 22 are rooted in pro-Russian misinformation and disinformation. The 22 worst amendments rooted in Kremlin propaganda came from 12 congresspersons, including 9 members of the Christian Nationalist House Freedom Caucus. As for what's next as we come into the weekend, the House Rules Committee considered a motion to H.R. 8035, which would prohibit the transfer of cluster munitions to Ukraine. That failed to pass by a vote of 2 for and 10 against. The committee then voted to adopt H.R. 8035, which passed in a 9-3 vote. Debate on its passage will start in the House on April the 20th. If the bill fails or passes, we'll issue a weekend flash report. And that's what we know. Please join me again on Monday. Hopefully, I'll still have electricity. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.